Welcome to Yoga Philosophy. This class will meet 6 times during the course of your yoga teacher training. And in it, we'll look at the history of yoga. We'll look at the different types of yoga. We'll look at different things that the word yoga means to different people. We'll explore some really important ancient texts, such as the Bhagavad Gita and the Yoga Sutras. We'll look at the lineages of yoga that survive today. Look at the various things that yogis have believed. Yoga is a very rich word. The practice of yoga is varied, as you can well imagine. Probably as we take this yoga teacher training, those of us here represent probably as many different schools or types of yoga as there are people. But I think before we begin the actual study of yoga historically or philosophically, before we look at how Patanjali, for example, defines yoga, or how yoga is used in the Bhagavad Gita, I think that before we would do all those things, it'd be neat to think about our starting point. And the starting point for each of us is very different. So now, before we proceed with this slideshow, before we proceed with my comments, I'd like you to pause this presentation and take about 5 minutes to answer a question. And the question that I'm going to pose to you, I'll pose in a couple different ways. What does the word yoga mean to you? Or maybe another way of saying it is, when you think of yoga, what do you think of? Let's just take 5 minutes to do that. And I would suggest that you think for the first 2 minutes and write for the next 3. And let's just see what our starting point is. My guess is that we are all starting from different places. And my hope is that this journey, as we study together, will take us to different places. So just by way of comparison, it's been exactly 2.5 minutes since I said hello. And so take about that long to think, and then about that long to write. No more than 2/3 of a page, maybe a lot less. Up to you. What does yoga mean to you? Pause, write, and then start the presentation again. It may be curious for you to learn that in the earliest uses of the word yoga in the ancient text, there's essentially no mention of asana. Yoga wasn't really about physical practice. The word asana is used by Patanjali once, and it means to take a seat. But really, yoga in Patanjali is about something else that we'll explore in just a minute. In the Bhagavad Gita, there are 4 uses of the word yoga, and we'll explore them during the course of this class as well. But just to emphasize, yoga was not primarily about a physical practice. It was about the inner life. It was about something spiritual. I think the text quoted in this page by T.S. Eliot says it well. It's to eliminate the control that the material nature exerts over our spirit. And I love the phrase, the still point of the turning world. What's our still point? What is that center? And where do we find it? Where do we find that place of calm and peacefulness that allows us to exist with equanimity, love, and essentially a yogic lifestyle in a world that's constantly a change and often very, very tough? We'll explore that concept in this class. The word yoga is used 4 ways in the Bhagavad Gita, and these are explained really well in the introduction to the Gita in the text that you have for this class, the Elfnath Eosparon. The first is Karma Yoga. That is a yoga of selfless action. Yoga is about serving others, serving our community, not about postures. The second is a yoga of meditation, Raja Yoga. It's that yoga that we think of often when we think of ascetics, saints, sitting in the cave, meditating, bringing their mental activity to a place that's calmer and calmer so that they can see and experience spiritual truth. Bhakti Yoga is the yoga of devotion. Sometimes we think of this when we think of Hare Krishnas, or people being so caught up in worship or loving the divine that they lose their sense of consciousness. Maybe you think of kirtan or some forms of spiritually induced ecstatic dance. Various forms of ecstasy and losing oneself in worship and love of the divine cross religious disciplines. Think of Sufism and the whirling dervishes, or think of Christian mystics, St. Teresa, St. John of the Cross. Think perhaps of Pentecostals. No matter what we think of it, ecstasy and losing consciousness in worship of the divine has been a part of human religious experience. And in yoga, that's seen through the lens of Bhakti Yoga. In Jnana Yoga, the final way that yoga is used in the Gita is yoga of knowledge. It's the student. We think of the medieval monks who studied scripture. We think of the Buddhist and Hindu mystics who studied ancient text over and over and over. Think of Tibetan Buddhists and their attempt to locate the divine, or perhaps better said, to have their experience of the divine in the study of sacred text and in the ways that the divine has revealed itself to humans. In the first section of this class, we looked at several uses of the word yoga. And we've seen Patanjali's use of it. Yoga is the stilling of the changing states of the mind. We've seen the 4 ways that yoga is used in the Gita. We've seen a statement about Kriya Yoga, also related to Patanjali, having to do with breath and pranayama. And we saw a couple of overviews from the world of scholarship. Again, I think what's interesting is that none of this really has to do with the physical practice. And so as we launch into this yoga teacher training, clearly a lot of what you're going to learn is about physical practice. Your practice is going to deepen. You're going to probably learn some new poses. You're going to learn how to teach poses. You're going to learn how to be safe in poses, how to help people, how to assist people safely in poses. So a lot of what you're going to do is going to be about the physical practice of yoga. But at the same time, we're going to be stressing that yoga is a much broader and deeper word. It's about the inner life. And everything that we've seen in these ancient texts points to yoga being about how we live our lives from the inside out. That's basically my first statement about yoga philosophy. It is a philosophy. It's a way of thinking and feeling, which then manifests itself in a way of being in the world. So, I'm glad you've taken these first steps, and I look forward to getting into some of the content of yoga philosophy. Next up, we'll be looking at the history of yoga.